Hey guys, back in another video. Today we're talking about Star Wars again, and something completely ridiculous. So there's been some articles that have come out based from a publication that said that a lot of the haters for Star Wars were politically motivated or they were Russian trolls, which is ridiculous, but we'll kind of go into the details of that. But in case you don't know, which should be very surprising, Star Wars The Last Jedi was a terrible movie. When Force Awakens came out, I think everyone was just happy it wasn't The Phantom Menace, and I think the initial, it was not bad, kind of made overhype the film in a way, because when I first left the theater, I was like, wow, that was amazing, And it wasn't until after repeated reviewings I was like, well, there's some problems with the movie, but it was still an okay movie. And Rogue One was fantastic. I think it's because I just didn't have high expectations for it, and it ended up being really, really good. And then The Last Jedi happened. The movie was complete garbage. When I first came out of the theater, I was immediately torn, is this a good movie or a bad movie? I didn't know. And eventually I ended up coming to the conclusion it was a terrible movie. And I've tried rewatching it since just to say, you know what, am I just being overly hateful? I've tried watching it again and I can't finish it. And there was a lot of online backlash, a ton of online backlash. And in my opinion, a lot of it was warranted. Right? I mean, the characters were terribly written. The plot was ridiculous. There's so many plot holes in it. The Canto Bite scene. I mean, it's just insane. And Disney, I think, was expecting this film. They weren't prepared for the backlash. I think they were expecting this to be a huge hit, to be a massive, critically, everyone's just going to love it. Everyone's going to want to suck Disney's dick over it, or Kathleen Kennedy's. And it didn't have what they were expecting. And I think that translated to Solo. This discontent translated over to Solo, which did terrible at the box office. I mean, I think overall they lost money on it. It wasn't a ton of money, but they still lost money. Whereas Last Jedi and Force Awakens and Rogue One, they made a lot of money. And Disney said, "Oh well, we oversaturated," which is too much Star Wars too quickly, which I think is completely false because Marvel's not having a problem with that. So there was a report published that a lot of the online hate was Russian trolls, which is not true. And I saw CNET had an article where they kind of agreed that no, it wasn't Russian trolls, but there's a bigger there's still problems. It's still problematic. So this is from Jackson Ryan at CNET. If you spend any time online, you no doubt heard the news. Research shows that a huge majority of fan hostility towards the oft-maligned The Last Jedi was work of Russian bots and trolls. In this day and age, embroiled as we are in the culture wars, it's tempting to take this news at face value, to scream voicelessly into the social media void. So far, yeah, I agree. But when you break down the numbers and look deeper, the reality is stunningly different. Star Wars does not have a Russian troll problem, and the fan backlash is far more complex than the reports might have you believe. If you're not up to speed, a republication research paper written by Morton Bay at the University of Southern California analyzed the sentiment towards The Last Jedi by studying tweets directed at Rian Johnson between the release of the film on December 13th to July 20th. Bay is a research fellow at the Center for Digital Future at USC and has previously worked on social media policy in the Trump era, Russian bots, fake news, journalism, social media, and social media ethics. He's also a Star Wars fan. So before we get into this, I want to talk about his paper, right? I actually read through it, and it does mention Gamergate. I'm not going to cover this whole thing, but basically he collected a series of about 12,000 tweets, or 1,200 tweets, and about 900 of them he said he felt were not satire of any way. And so he did his review of about 920-something tweets, I believe. And it was... which is such a very small selection considering how many tweets there usually are. That's a very small subset of tweets. But what his report concluded was that there was a smaller percentage of them that were Russian trolls. And he does link to the document of how he determined that. He used a tool that was not developed by him to determine that. And it ends up being a rabbit hole of publications, which essentially what it boils down to is that it looks at the time frames tweets are tweeted and how active the user is. So that's pretty much the basis of your Russian troll, is if you tweet X amount of times a day during these hours, you must be a Russian troll, right? And also if you are divisive, right? That's the key element. So that's the basis of what makes you a Russian troll, right? So nobody actually talks about that, right? There's not a whole lot more data to say that you're a Russian troll other than that. That's what they use. That's what they base this whole thing off of. But he goes on to about how it's a lot of the people who do it are people who are alt-right, right? And again, if you look at the report, there's no, or in the publication, there's no delineation of what it is. It just looks at the history of the users and say, oh, they're conservative, so they're alt-right. Okay, so it is a very biased report to begin with. So where were we? It's safe to say Last Jedi is one of the most divisive films in the past 12 months. The discourse has been vitriolic. Harassment campaign saw Kelly Marie Tron, who plays Rose Tico, leave social media, and one group of fans petitioned to remake The Last Jedi altogether. Research like this can be important, highlighting some of the issues with the polarization of social media and pop culture, and how they may be used to influence political discourse. However, though the goals are noble, the research is not definitive, a fact that seems to have been lost in the media firestorm that set it off. So let's dig deeper on the research. So again, I agree with the CNET article here, so far. Bay's paper stated that 50.9% of those tweeting negatively about The Last Jedi were likely to be politically motivated or not even human. This was the major takeaway for a panoply of media outlets that then stated most of the negative sentiments directed at The Last Jedi came from Russian trolls. But that is not the truth, or at least it distorts the truth. Bay collected 1,200 tweets using Twitter's advanced search function, all of which were tweeted to Rian Johnson's account over a 7-month period post-release. After cleaning the dataset, Bay finished with 967 tweets. He then manually determined whether a tweet was negative, positive, or neutral. Ultimately deciding the sentiment of a particular tweet was left up to Bay. To separate the negative tweets out even more, Bay would search the accounts with high activity for terms such as Trump or SJW to determine their political stance. Of the 967 tweets analyzed, 206 expressed a negative sentiment toward the film and its director. Of the 206 comments, 61 were real people reported to have a political agenda, 11 were bots, and only 33 appeared to be trolls. Of those 33, just 16 appeared to possess characteristics consistent with Russian troll accounts. So that, again, this goes back to if you post within a certain number of, if you post X number of tweets per hour or per day, and if you tweet between certain hours, that's how they determine you're a Russian troll, by the way. In reality, less than 1 in 10 tweets were from Russian trolls, nowhere near the 50% being widely reported. A less exciting story. There are a few issues here. The first is that Bay's collection methods relies only on tweets directed at Rian Johnson. Other accounts related to the film, such as that of Luke Skywalker, who has almost triple the amount of followers and assumedly a far greater reach than Johnson, were not analyzed. This significantly limits the power of the analysis. Notably, the research did in fact catch the eye of the Last Jedi director himself, causing to remark, what the top line describes is consistent with my experience online. Of course, it would be consistent with his experience online because the research paper directly used Johnson's tweets as the source of their data. It quite literally analyzed his experience online. So instead of actually just doing search for, Last Jedi, or hashtag Last Jedi, that would probably have been the best way to collect tweets, would just been use the hashtag The Last Jedi, as opposed to just Rian Johnson. Now, this would probably be helpful if you're looking to see if he was brigaded or if there's some kind of campaign against him or something like that. That would be more, I think, useful, but I don't know why he just didn't do a search for hashtag The Last Jedi during that time frame. While it's true that half the negative tweets, 105 of the 206, were classified as politically motivated bots, trolls, or sock puppets, the reporting that ensued diluted this message and conflated all of these separate negative reactions together. This cherry-picking helps tell a story, but it muddies the waters. None of us say this was Bay's intention. The 38-page research paper explains his methodology in depth and with great clarity. He draws conclusions based on the dataset he has acquired and even states that it has limitations, and the study is of less than comprehensive nature. In his conclusion, he remarks that the assertions made within this paper must be considered only within the limited scope of the dataset. He knows that makes for a less exciting story. So exactly, he wanted to create a story. He wanted to create a narrative. That's all his report is for, is just to create a narrative that, hey, people who hate Last Star Wars are alt-right, politically motivated alt-right people, which, or Gamergate people, which he actually says in the report, which automatically shuts down the discussion, because things like Gamergate, Gamergater, or someone who's alt-right is the same thing as calling someone a Nazi. It shuts down their opinion and their value. So it's easy to do that. You can just call anybody a Nazi or call anybody alt-right, and that's your defense. That's how you shut them down. So if they do have a valid opinion, no one will hear it, regardless if they're actually a Nazi or not. That doesn't matter, right? So using words or weapons, and calling somebody an alt-right or Nazi, or even Gamergater, shuts them out, right? So this report, if you look at it, basically saying their opinion doesn't matter because that's what they are, right? And he has nothing in his report saying, how do I identify someone as alt-right, right? All he does is say that they've used terms like Trump and SJW, right? So that's not a really comprehensive way to say, now if you see somebody who says, oh, I want genocide of minorities, then yeah, you could say that person, his tweets probably don't matter. But he didn't do that kind of research. Just, had they used the term SJW and Trump, and there was some other right leaning conservative keywords he looked for, but anybody who used them, he would just classify them as alt-right. Not like somebody who's center can use the term SJW. Having worked as a journalist for many years, I know how the game works, he explains. Bay is moderately disappointed in some of the major media brands that ran articles without taking the time to dig a little deeper. He understands that some of his findings were buried because the producer less enticing lead than the Russian troll army invading the Star Wars galaxy. That's just not what his research suggests. The suspected Russian trolls are so few that it is basically the normal amount of Russian trolls you would expect to be present in high-profile online debate. High of a scum and villainy. I'm not here to tell you that the reaction to Last Jedi did not contain a myriad of trolls, bullies, or bots. It's plain for all to see that Star Wars fandom continues to tear itself into two online trading barbs almost a year after Last Jedi was released. The conversation has fused with alt-right politics, diversity in the media, and Trump-era social media discourse. A very small minority of the fandom was involved in that conversation, at least on Twitter. This one specific instance appears to be artificially constructed. More importantly, it is impossible to make generalized sweeping statements about the state of Star Wars discourse from this one particular study. It is, by Bay's own admissions, limited in the conclusions that it can draw. It's hampered by a proportionally small sample size and prone to bias. It's misleading to say half when not every single Star Wars hater was using the data set. To be clear, it's not bad research, but the real story, according to Bay, shows that American political activists have started using the same tactics as Russians to insert themselves in any sort of debate on social media where a rift can be widened. His work confirms the idea that pop culture debates on social media can be politicized and eventually used for strategic purposes. He also suggests that pop culture fandoms are another place to look when trying to decipher how political messaging can be propagated online. The truth is simple. The majority of people who read about Bay's research will never go and read the study from top to bottom, which is true. And the problem is, though, is that they'll read it, but they won't dig deeper in that. So, you can't tell. You could tell his motivations if you read it from top to bottom, and people are not going to look at the accompanying research of what makes a Russian troll, and no one's going to look and question what he thinks an alt-righter is, right? Or somebody who's or just not just a Russian troll, but just a troll in general. Because it's easier just to write off people you disagree with as a troll or an alt-righter. The information will be presented to them and ingested through a second-hand osmosis via outlets trying to capture a snapshot of the research that most appeals to their audience. There's no hard analysis of the methods, no interrogation of the data set, and that approach only serves to inflame the discourse even more. Which I think, honestly, this report does. I mean, if he was just going to say, well, I'm just going to use people who tweeted at Ryan Johnson, right? It's almost like maybe he did people who tweeted at Mark Hamill, or people who did use hashtag Last Jedi. Let's say he used those, but he didn't get the results he wanted. So he just stuck with that Ryan Johnson. Now, granted, that may not have happened, right? But because of the fact that the scope of his report was so narrow, and it says, yeah, I know it's narrow, makes me question why even do the report at all, when you could just easily say, you know what, there is, hey, I just did this narrow thing, there's a problem, maybe there's a problem wider, in a bigger picture, there's a bigger problem. Or it could just be that he got the best results using @Ryan Johnson. I don't know. I hate to try to put words in his mouth or, question his intentions, but it's easy for someone to read the report from top to bottom and think that. Ultimately, it's ironic that an era when fake news and misinformation is so rife, Bay's study found widespread appeal via a media-driven narrative that was far, far away from the truth. So, this report was probably the most centrist report of the bunch that I've read. Most of them were pretty, used a lot of hyperbole and stuff. I think one thing that people don't realize is also the narrative has already been framed, right? So the SJWs think that they have won Star Wars. They have successfully captured it and integrated their stuff into it. And I think that's one of the things about Last Jedi that didn't go over so well, was the fact that you had, Admiral Dildo, or whatever her name was, and then you had Rey, who is becoming super powerful, really not a lot of work. The whole Canto Bite scene and its, message about the rich are getting richer and stuff like that. Rose Tico was just a terrible character. It's almost... I just hope that character wasn't shoehorned in because they just wanted an Asian person in. I mean, I have no problem with the actress. I just think it's a terrible character. And I do think it's terrible that she was chased offline, but I don't think she was chased offline because people don't like Asians. It's just people hated the character. And it's not her fault. Shoot. If I was offered the money to play in a Star Wars movie, I don't care how crappy the Star Wars movie is, I would, no matter what character it is or anything, I would take the chance to do it. Because you're in Star Wars. I mean, even though, yes, The Last Jedi has been very disappointing to me, I do think, I still love Star Wars as a whole. But, kind of, I digress. So, the SJWs think they won Star Wars, right? And so anybody who complains against The Last Jedi are going to people who see the intentions, that, hey, the storytelling sucks, but there's definitely SJW bias or left-leaning bias in there. And that is a legitimate complaint about the film, right? So if anybody's actually critiquing the film legitimately, are going to mention, hey, there is a social justice bias in this, right? Go broke. Whenever they put in identity politics in something, it's going to make it worse. So when those people complain about it, they're automatically labeled as an alt-righter, right? I can complain that, yes, Rey is not a good female protagonist, but I could easily say Mara Jade in the expanded universe was a good female protagonist, right? They don't hear that part. They just hear me saying Rey's not a good female protagonist. And so, and even the main chick in Rogue One, she was a much better protagonist, in my opinion, than Rey. Much better protagonist. I don't have a problem with female protagonists, but Rey just feels like it's a forced female protagonist. She's incredibly forced. And if you complain about that, you're automatically an alt-righter. So, again, and that means it's a negative tweet and that you hate women and thus you're a troll, right? And if you happen to tweet a lot within a certain time, you're also a troll. Or if you have a bot that reposts tweets of people you like, right? Because, it's very easy to create, okay, you know what? Out of all the Twitter sphere, I'm going to create a bot that posts things that I like or retweet what I like, right? And it retweets something that has legitimate critical analysis of Last Jedi. It's a Russian troll, or it's a bot, or a sock puppet, or whatever. But nobody reads in the details of those labels. What is a sock puppet? What is a troll? What is a Russian troll? What is a bot? What is an alt-righter? What is a gamergator? How do they define those terms? You really have to look and see how they define those terms. And the SJWs have gotten to the point where any negative feedback or criticism of the film, you can easily just be thrown into that because they're into any of those categories easily, and thus you're shut down. So I think they're people are not doing the reading they need to do. They're not reading deep down enough to realize that the labels they're using for these accounts is just the wrong thing. So, but anyways, I'm starting to rant now and ramble. I mean, it's obvious, you know, The Force Awakens made $4 billion, and The Last Jedi made $2 billion. It made half the amount of money that The Force Awakens did. And that's not Russian trolls. That's not bots and sock puppets. That's real people going to the theater. So, you know, the proof is in the pudding, you know, essentially. So anyways, but yeah, just do your research, read into things. Don't read the articles, don't take them at face value. Actually read the reports and read the citations of the reports. And you get a much better understanding about how ridiculous this all is. So anyways, I'm going to get out of here. If you guys like to see this kind of content, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll make more videos in the future. Take it easy.